And it starts with this verse, and it's a beautiful verse that should really be the theme of our lives, especially our spiritual lives. It talks about faith as the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not yet seen. So faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not yet seen. And so look, it talks about the people of old. Sorry about that. Yes. One. It's the nod to the left. It was 1, 2, yes. No, it's on. So it goes on to talk about people in the Old Testament that exercised the faith they had, right? They received a calling from God, and they didn't just receive a calling, they believed God, most importantly, right? See, they believed, they put their faith to work. It was faith in action, and they believed God. That's why this chapter calls them heroes of the faith. And so look, it's called faith because when you put it to work, it's not like it seems, right? It's going to be hard. You're confronted with hardship, with trials, right? With troubles. And so this is where faith comes out. Do you believe? Despite what you're going to go up against, do you believe? And so look, and I recommend for you guys to read this chapter at home, the entire chapter. But this chapter is also dubbed famously the Hall of Faith, right? Yeah, you guys heard of the Hall of Fame? Whether it be the NFL, basketball, baseball. Well, this chapter is called appropriately the Hall of Faith. And so look, by faith, Enoch did not see death, right? He did see death. God took him up because he said, man, you know what? This world doesn't even deserve you. You're too righteous. Let me take you up. So by faith, Enoch did not see death. By faith, Noah constructed an ark, right? He received a word from God. He believed God. And then the opposition, what was the opposition? The world mocked him, right? They laughed at him. They didn't believe, but he believed. By faith, he constructed that ark. By faith, Abraham stepped out from his home, right? From comfort, from everything that he knew, and he ventured out into the unknown. He believed God by faith. And then his wife, Sarah, by faith, she received the power to conceive that son of promise, right? The child of promise. And then Moses, right? The great Moses, by faith, he left Egypt. He chose to suffer with his people, with God's people. He ventured out, he left. And then by that same faith, he went back to Egypt to save his people, right? So by faith, these guys, these are the heroes of the faith. And so you're going down the chapter, Abraham, Enoch, great guys, Moses, great guys in the faith, right? The heroes of the Old Testament. And then down the chapter, you come across the name Samson. Like Samson, really? Like, you guys know about the story of Samson? What do we know about him? What's the prevailing thought about him? He was strong, right? Like, this guy was literally a superhero. Like, this guy would give Hulk 12 rounds in a boxing match. He was literally a superhero. But Samson, like, we're talking about the great Abraham, right? Dubbed the friend of God, and the other friend of God, Moses. Two friends of God. There's not many friends of God mentioned in the Old Testament, but there you have them, Abraham and Moses. But then in that same chapter, it's talking about Samson, right? Samson, you don't believe it. Like, really, Samson? And yes, like, Samson was flawed and weak, and we know more about his failings and faults, right, than we know about his successes. We speak more about that than what he actually accomplished, because he did accomplish many feats. But look, at face value, and it's appropriate, right, because of what he did. But at face value, do we give Samson much credit? Traditionally we don't, right? In the church, we kind of use him as an example of what not to do, right, with your calling. But he did have a tremendous calling. And then, and if you want to follow me, it's Judges chapter 13, verse 5. I'm going to start there. The book of Judges, chapter 13, verse 5. And it says of Samson, it says, no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. And he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. And so look, he was physically strong, right? He was endowed with such strength that God gave him this calling. He's gonna begin to free Israel. He's going to save my people. This is a guy I choose to give this calling to, and I'm going to bless him tremendously. And we know him, like we said, by his physical strength, right? And this is ironic, right? Because who does God like to use to accomplish his work? He likes to use the humble, the weak, right? Those that nobody thinks, nobody gives a second thought to, right? And he does it so that he glorifies himself. Like, you can't receive the glory, right? It wasn't because of your wit, your wisdom, charisma. No, it's because I did it, right? If it wasn't for me, how would you accomplish these things, right? So now look, the other side of that coin, here's God giving all this strength, giving all this, I imagine Samson was charismatic to some degree, such, a personality, and I'm going to show you that all that counts for nothing. I can give man all of these things, and if he doesn't obey me, then it counts for nothing. I can't use this guy. He's too proud. He's too proud. I can't use him. But he uses these guys as an example to us, right? What he can do with everything that you have, your natural born talents, and without, especially without, right? We see throughout the Bible things he's done with humble people, common people. And so look, God says, I have no use for those too proud that don't want to rely on me. Samson relied on himself many times. We know his story, right? He relied on himself. And it's like he coasted with what he was given. He coasted with that blessing, with that strength. He knew his calling, but he didn't give himself wholly to God. He acted on his own many times. And so by all accounts, I mean, Samson's life would seem like a failure. I don't know, do you raise your hand? Do you agree? The culmination of his entire life, would you say he failed or succeeded? I guess depending on how you explain it, it could be both or one or the other, right? However you see it. And look, I tended to think you could look at his life and it was more like a failure. Mm-hmm. Right? Because look, his story is in what book? We just read from it. Book of Judges, right? What is a judge of Israel supposed to do? He's supposed to liberate Israel, right? And so look, military-wise, he's supposed to lead an army into battles. Did he lead an army? He wasn't for the people, right? He did things on his own. It's almost like he just settled personal vendettas he had with the Philistines. He did things on his own. And then if these judges won those battles, because God was with them, right? If they won those battles, they would go back into civic duty. So the other facet of the responsibilities for judges, they're supposed to settle disputes. They're supposed to bring social order in the people. They're supposed to bring order among the 12 tribes, because oftentimes the tribes there would be infighting, there would be discord, and so he was supposed to bring social order there among the 12 tribes, and then he was supposed to settle legal disputes. I read the book of Judges. I don't read any of that. He didn't do any of that. And then look, most importantly, so we talked about what he's supposed to do military-wise, and then his civic duty, and then most importantly, spiritually. After all that, after he's won the battles, he brings social order, he's supposed to bring the people of Israel and the people of God back to Yahweh, right? To worship him, to praise him, and to rid the land of paganism, of foreign gods and false gods. Because oftentimes what happens, this is a cycle, right? They sin, they welcome foreign gods, they build altars to foreign gods, and so the judge is supposed to tear those altars down, especially the one of Baal. And so we read his story, and he doesn't do any of that. He's supposed to liberate Israel. He's supposed to bring them back to Yahweh, to praise him, honor him, to follow the law of Moses. But he didn't do any of that. Oftentimes he walked into paganism. If you read his story, and I hope you do, it's chapters, Judges, and 13 through 16. He didn't do any of that. He walked into these foreign lands, and he didn't do it wholeheartedly, with devotion to God in mind, right? He did it for his own pleasure. And look, if you're a strong judge, if you're a righteous judge, if you did what you were supposed to do, if you succeeded in winning those battles and bringing social order, bringing the people back spiritually, there would be peace, long periods of peace. You would enjoy, it would be a fruitful period where God blesses you, and because you're praising Him, you're honoring Him, you're giving Him His due place. And look, so he failed at those things, right, as a judge. By all accounts, it doesn't seem like he was a judge at all. But he also had that vow of a Nazarite, right? We read about it. He's supposed to be a Nazarite. They're supposed to consecrate themselves. They're not supposed to cut their hair. They're not supposed to touch anything that's dead, right? And he played around with his calling. You read about his story. He tears this lion to pieces, and then sometime after he goes, sees his lion. There's bees hovering above it, so he goes over there and he scoops up a handful of honey, eats it, and gives it to his parents. He's not supposed to do that. And then he's not supposed to drink wine. So when he meets his first wife, he met her at what's the name of the town? Doesn't matter, but he throws a feast. And I don't imagine they were drinking apple juice, right? He drank wine. And so he failed at that. And so look, yes, so by all accounts, like I said, it seems like his life was an utter failure. He wasn't devoted to God, right? And look, when we fail, because we do, there's remorse, right? The regret. You feel bad, and then by your own accord, you don't want to be in the presence of God, right? You feel like you're not worthy of being in His presence, and you want to step away, and it's hard when you fall and when you fail and when you falter. You don't want to be in His presence. But Samson, when he did all these things, when he fell and when he would ignore his calling and not fulfill his duty and ignore his vows. There's no remorse in his life. There's no regret. He keeps on going as he pleases, right? So, yes, by all accounts, it seems like his life is a failure. By all accounts, right? It seems every facet of his life, not devoted to God at all. But even then, God remains with him. The presence of God was with him, right? He was with him. And so, look, we have to understand that God knew how. When you read his story and it begins, and it says that what we read, right, that he will be a Nazarite, and that he's going to begin to save the people from Israel. I imagine, and I think we know the answer, that God knew how Samson would lead his life, no? Every failing, every mistake, every misstep, every misuse of his calling, right? I think God knew. And look, by that same, by that same idea, God knew how we would lead our life. Each and every mistake, every misstep, right? Everything we would do, how we would lead our lives, right? And for good and for bad. And it doesn't faze him, right? Your transgressions, your mistakes, it doesn't faze God. It doesn't deter him from keeping on using you, right? That calling that he has for your life is still intact. Nothing surprises him. Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." So that before you were even conceived, right? He knew your name. He knew how you would walk, how you would talk, right? He knew your who you would surround yourself with. He knows the number of hairs on your head, right? He knew when we would go balding, right? When we would lose our hair. He knows each and every detail of our lives. He knew our dislikes and likes, and he knew when we would hit rock bottom, right? And he knows when he would pick us up again. But look, this is what I want to emphasize. He would especially know where you will end up. And then for Easter, if you were here, I spoke about the eternal promise, right? Set in place before the creation of anything. And that's the mystery, right? There's this eternal promise already to save his creation that hasn't fell yet. And I said, like, if God is a creator of time, he's not bound by time like we are, right? He's outside the concept of time, and he's not bound by it. So he can see that whole continuum of your life, your whole life trajectory right in front of him. He knows where you end up. He knows where you are now. He knows your past. So he's not bound by time. So he knows where you're going to end up as well. He knows all those things. And yet, so your calling stays intact, right? So Samson had a calling, and he knew how Samson would end up. And he knew the terrible mistakes he would do. And so look, he knows you're going to finish the race. He knows you're going to finish the race, right? He knows you're going to Your story is one of success, right? But look, we're talking about the heroes of the faith, that they chose to believe in God. They believed his promises. That's why they're considered heroes of the faith. They're not perfect, right? I talked about Moses, Enoch, Abraham. These guys made some terrible mistakes. They at times they didn't believe God and took matters into their own hands. And here seemingly Samson also counted as one of the heroes. He's like the outlier, right? Sticking out like a sore thumb, because at times it looks like he didn't depend on God for anything. He chose to rely on his own strength and wit, right? And so look, when you believe him, when you believe his promises, that is how you move and touch God, right? By faith. Your faith is what pleases him. It's a pleasant aroma to him when you believe. When you believe, but it's tough, right? Because we said faith is you putting it into work, right? That means you have the odds stacked against you, but you continue to believe in God. Despite all that, despite what you see in front of you, despite your circumstances, right? So look, you each have a calling. Can we all agree on that?
Amen.
You guys believe you have a calling? Because I believe you do. And I was thinking about this, that back then I like sports, football, boxing. I would bet on sports. I would bet I would bet over-unders, if a game it would go for 48 points combined or under. And then boxing, I would bet all. Now look, don't go home thinking I have a gambling problem, right? This is me before. I used to bet a lot. But if someone came here and said, hey, do you think the people there of Heroes Church, you think they have a calling? Yes, absolutely. My money's on you guys. I know God has a calling for you guys. For sure, definitely. But look, it's one thing to receive that calling, right? And it's another to believe, right? And continue to believe. And continue, right? On the onset, it's very easy in the beginning, but when the going gets tough, right, that's when you put that faith into action. And so look, Moses, Enoch, Abraham, Sarah, Samson, considered heroes of the faith because they endured, right? Persevered. They believed God. Now, I want to ask you something. Do you believe God with what he has promised you? We each have received promises, right? We each have received a word. Do you continue to believe God? Because when we fail, when all things go awry and everything's bad, it may seem like God departs, right? Like he withdraws his presence. And that's not quite the case, right? He still looks from afar. He still knows your story. He still counts your life as a good one. He's still going to bring you to success. And so look, are you willing to persevere and act with faith according to your calling, even when troubles of many kind come at you? James 1:12 reads, blessed is the one who endures trials, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. And 2 Chronicles 15:7 reads, but as for you, be strong, don't give up, for your work has a reward. And so look, the reality is that we have enough strength and faith to endure attacks from the outside, right? You share the message of Christ, and yeah, you endure the attacks, the mockery, the hate, the laughter. That's fine. Sometimes that's welcomed, right? When you're in the presence of God, that you welcome all that. It's the price you pay, right? But look, those we can endure sometimes. But what about when the trials come from the inside, right? We're talking about our own selves, because we're going to get in our own way. When we fall, right? What do? We beat ourselves up. I don't know. I do when I fall, when I make mistakes, when I sin, I do feel bad. I don't want to be in the presence of God because I don't feel worthy. We say, right? We often withdraw ourselves. We're tougher on ourselves than God is on us. That's the truth. That's the reality. So are you going to have enough faith to do the opposite? Are you going to believe the calling is still there for you, right, when you do that? Because I don't know. Can you show me a verse in the Bible where it calls us to be perfect? Pastor, have you come across? No, not yet. So look, that is the toughest part. When we fall and fail time and time again, those are sometimes the trials, right, that we're not going to be able to endure. We want to give up. It's like, God, I can't stand with this calling. Call somebody else. I keep falling, I can't do this. It's too difficult. Why do you even give me this calling, right? I'm not even worthy of it. Look, I keep doing this. I keep doing that. Use somebody else. He's not going to let you off that easy. And so look, let me challenge you to do this. I want to challenge you guys. Everyone here. Do you have the kind of faith that says, God, I am weak, I'm not enough, but I have confidence that your grace is sufficient, right? That Jesus Christ, the perfecter of our faith, is in me, that he may grow in me, and he's the one that, augments my faith. In you I rest, in you I have confidence that my calling is not diminished by my failings, but it is augmented by your love for me. That is faith, right? To get close to God and to praise him even when you fought to sin. Even when you make a mistake that makes you want to retreat from his presence. And I'm not condoning sin, right? I'm not condoning it. When you turn your life around, repent, right? The danger is when you make a habit out of it. But what I'm trying to say is, we're going to fall. We're going to fall leaving service. We're going to think of something we shouldn't have thought of. We're going to listen to something we shouldn't have listened to. We're going to say things that, we wish we could take them back. That's a reality. If not tonight, tomorrow, or the next several weeks, we're going to do things that don't please God. But look, sometimes we get in our own way, right? We very quickly want to withdraw from the calling. We want to step away. God, use somebody else. Call somebody else. I'm not worthy, right? And so look, we picked apart Samson's life and we deemed him a failure, right? I said, by all accounts, at face value, you read his story, and man, this guy fell hard. This guy fell hard, right? But think about it. What if someone picked apart our life, our story? Imagine if God permits and several hundred years have passed and people are reading your story, picking it apart. Right? Each one of us, every one of us. Yeah, like point out our weaknesses, right? But look, God says you're perfect, right? Because you're fulfilling a promise that he gave to you. He's fulfilling you. He's doing something in you. That's why you're perfect. Jesus Christ gives you worth, right? Jesus Christ is the one that brings you to the Father, and he's the one that makes a case for you. And so look, God sees all of your flaws, your mistakes, your moments of shame and guilt. He packages this, it's packaged all together, and for the final product, right? It's all beautiful to him. This is all part of it. Part and parcel of your life story is every single mistake you do, all the mess, everything, it's all part of your story. Why? Because it glorifies him. It glorifies and honors him. Your life honors him. And so look, he's also going to do things against our convention and norms. Look, if you were one of the ones that for some time you probably departed from the faith, you withdrew from your calling, the going got tough, right? It's happened to me before in my life. You gotta believe that God's not done with you, right? He's not gonna forget about you. He's not, like I said earlier, he's not gonna let you off easy. He's gonna keep grabbing your attention. And he's going to bring you back. He's going to disrupt you to come back. And we're gonna read something here that's wonderful and beautiful. He's going to bring some disruption that jumpstarts you back from where you left. Look, Judges 14, 1 through 4. It says, Samson went down to Timnah, that's the name of the town, Timnah, and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine, Pastor? How do you say? Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. His father and mother replied, isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? But Samson said to his father, get her for me, she's a right one for me. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. Look, if you know any history about Israel and Philistine, they were sworn enemies, right? Sworn enemies. They weren't supposed to mingle. And this wasn't because they chose it. This was an edict from God. The Philistines were pagans. And they weren't supposed to mingle, not even talk to each other. Here's God paving the way, opening the door so that this Philistine woman can come together with Samson. How does that work? God doing this. But look, you got to understand, this was a disruption, right? Because it says what? Philistine, for at that time, they were ruling over Israel. See, this is the cycle, right? Israel sins. And God hands them over to their enemies, and there's a testing period, usually 40 years. In this case, it was also 40 years. And they forget. They acclimate. They get used to. They make a home of that testing period, right? Excuse me. So they were fine. There was peace. There was peace. God needed a disruption. And God needed to do something quick, right? So this was all ordained. All ordained. And they don't be surprised. My point is, don't be surprised with the things that God's going to do in your life to get your attention. He's going to cause some disruption. And don't think He's going to do it in a conventional way. Sometimes He's going to do things the way you least expect. You might even say, God, this is unholy, but this is God doing it. I remember my mom was talking about a pastor she knew. And this guy, a big church in Mexico, I think. One night, great service, man. The house was packed, worship perfect, on point. And it was a blessing that night. And he's walking home that night, and he passes by this gay nightclub or a gay bar, one of those. But he was honest, and he's like, yeah, I kind of looked at that place for a few seconds. I was like, disdain, like disgust. And God tells him right away, He says, I want you to go in there. And the guy's like, nah, I'm not, I don't want to go in there. Like, where are you going to take me there? He's like, go in there. I want to show you something. You want to act all righteous? Go in there. Listen to me. Obey me. So he goes in there. He sits down. He's kind of just there's, people watching. And God tells them, this is what they're looking for. They're looking for acceptance. And this is where they get it. They're looking for love and embrace and acceptance. This is where they get it. So look, I'm not going to tell you, Pastor Gene's not going to tell you, hey guys, I want you to go to a gay nightclub. Tell me what you learned. I'm not going to tell you that, but God did to this pastor. He did. He's going to do things in an unconventional way, and don't be surprised when He does that, or the people He uses to speak to you. He's going to do it. So look, don't be surprised, because He's going to do that often, and more often than not. Believe it or not. So He's going to do that. He's going to cause a disruption, right? He wants to teach you something, or in this case, He's going to bring you back to your calling. And so look, Philistine rulership over Israel was a testing period, right? Like we said, 40 years. But it was supposed to be temporary. And Israel made a home of, that testing period. And so God needed a catalyst, right, to disrupt that. In this story, Samson was that catalyst. He started the process of liberation. What did we say? The first verse, that Samson would begin to liberate Israel, right, from the Philistines. And he was going to do just that. And so look at Samson coming together with this Philistine woman he met. It would set in motion a chain of events that would cause enmity between Israel and Philistine. Everything was good. There was peace. After 40 years, you get used to things, right? I imagine, children were being born. They made a home there. They had businesses. Everything was fine. There was no violence, no chaos. They mingled fine. And I'm pretty sure they probably forgot that God was going to liberate them. That this was, them being there was because He handed them over to Philistines, right? They probably forgot. Imagine the people that knew that and they died within those 40 periods. They never saw the promise. They never saw the promise, right? So God needed to do something to break the peace, and the process of liberation would begin. Do you guys know how the American Revolution began? We were trying to free ourselves from whom? We should know this. Britain, right? Britain. Yeah, but look, leading up to it, there was apparent peace. From the outside looking in, it would seem like there was autonomy, like we were acting on our own, that Britain wasn't really ruling over us. So there was peace. It was fine. It didn't look like Britain was still calling the shots over here. But what was the disruption? They wanted to impose new taxes. That's what rattle things, right? Now imagine if when they want to impose new taxes on us today, we would act the same way. We take it on the chin now, huh? We don't do anything. But look, that was a disruption, right? There was peace. Everything was good and gravy, and something had to happen. This is what God was doing through Samson's life. He had to break that peace and remind them, hey guys, you don't belong there. You don't belong there. Hey, you guys don't belong outside your calling. When you feel bad about yourselves, when your self-esteem is so low that you want to retreat rather than get closer to God, God's going to bring a disruption and remind you, you don't belong out there. You belong over here with me, the way you are, right? Your calling is still there. And so look, I'm finishing up here. So God's going to cause a disruption. And so look, after Samson started, and I'm finishing up here, and after Samson started messing with Philistine women like he shouldn't have, but apparently God permitted it, and it was written that it would happen like that. After he had terrorized all the Philistines, right, he killed, if you read his story, he killed 1,000 Philistines with a donkey's jawbone. That's how strong he was, and we read about how he would do this and that, right, and he didn't realize, because like I said, he was coasting with his gift and calling. He didn't devote himself to God. When he needed to get out of a jam, that's when he would pray to God. But he coasted, and he didn't realize that the presence of God was barely with him. And then when he meets his lovely Delilah, right? The Philistines come to her, hey, we need to know what the secret to his strength is. We need to bring this guy down. This guy's tearing us apart. This guy's hurting us. He's killing many of our men. Find out, and we'll pay you what the secret to his strength is. And so during an intimate moment, he confides in her and says, it's my hair. Right? He had ignored every other vow, but somehow he still had his hair nice and intact. Probably had it all nice. But she finds out the secret to his strength and success is his hair. And he tells her, yeah, you cut my hair, I lose all my strength. And so when he confides in her, and she tells the Philistines, and they come and they shave off his head, it says that he loses his hair. That was the last straw. God's like, all right, I'm done with you, man. You didn't take this serious. You didn't. I give you a tremendous calling. You were going to liberate my people, and you, just like that, you give it away. And he left. God's presence left him. And so they bound him, right? The Philistines bound him. Finally, yes, we got this man, powerful man of God. We got him. We're bringing him over. They gouge his eyes out. He's bald and blind, right? And they arrest him and they tie him up to the pillars, it says, of their temple, of their gods. Dagon is the name of that temple. So they bring him over, and then look, it says, now this is the Philistines. Now in verse 23, now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god and to rejoice, and they said, our God has given Samson our enemy into our hand. Our God has given Samson and our enemy into our hand. So look, they almost had it, right? They thought they pretty much had it. They bound this man of God in a way they thought they had, this was a blow to the God of Israel. We finally did it, right? We finally did it. And they probably thought, this God of theirs, he's probably lost a bit of his touch, right? He's not so big and scary after all. And what do we read? Because look, you read that when they shave his head, and this is important, it's a little detail, but it says that his hair started to grow a little back again. So in a way, this is symbolic, like, hey, God's not done yet, right? There's still one last thing he's going to do. He hasn't forgotten about that calling. And so we see him bound there, and they're happy and rejoicing, and they're about to celebrate because the apparent strong man of God, we have him here, bald and blind. We're about to kill him, and we're going to offer sacrifices to our gods because we have succeeded, right? And one last cry, right? One last cry from Samson. And look, this is ironic because this is all the way at the end of his story. We finally see him surrendered to God. Nowhere else in his story do we ever see him surrender. But finally here, we see him finally surrender. He says, God, remember me, and please strengthen me just this once. And God honors that, right? And God does honor that. So all along, it wasn't that God gave him strength. It wasn't that God gave him this and that. It was always that God's presence was with him. Right? So look, it's not what he has given you. It's not that he has given you this gift or that talent or this and that. It's that God's presence is with you because he can use you with that or without that. So here, look, Samson apparently devoid of all his strength, but one last chance, one last opportunity. God's going to descend and he's going to use Samson. One last shot, right? And so look, he brings down the roof and he destroys the people that were there. He not only kills his life, but over 3,000 people that were there present to celebrate this victory over Samson and apparently over the God of Israel. And And what would you say? You still think up to this point that his life was a failure? That he failed his calling? How do you see it? How would you explain the story to someone? Did he fail? Okay. Okay. Up to the very last moment, right? But look, when he brought down the roof and destroyed over 3,000 of the Philistines, who do you think was included among those people? It was the Philistine rulership, kings, lords, right? They were all present there. So he did fulfill his calling. His life wasn't a mistake. It wasn't this, when he killed himself and all the people there, it wasn't one last opportunity for God to redeem his life. He did redeem it, but look, this was the plan all along. This was the plan. This was the culmination of everything that God had ordained in his life, the calling he has given him, because he did begin to liberate Israel. He destroyed the whole rulership right then and there in one moment. Then God came one last time and fulfilled that calling. That wasn't a failure, right? He did succeed. He is a hero of the faith. Yet he's rightfully counted as a hero of the faith in Hebrews chapter 11, right? And so look, it might be that you receive the promise, or that you may be the catalyst that starts the promise, right? Because look, Hebrews 11, the last verse, or second to last verse, Hebrews 11:39, it says, it talks about the heroes of the faith. All these were approved through their faith, but they did not receive what was promised. Right? Did Samson see that promise? He brought the roof down and killed himself, right? But he was the catalyst, right? He began the process of that promise. He did. And look, so sometimes, Pastor, sometimes, you know, right? Sometimes we're gonna see the promise, right? Some promises we're gonna live it, we're gonna receive it. And some promises we're just gonna be the catalyst. We're just gonna start them. We won't see them, right? Moses, he started the journey, right, to go into the promised land, but he didn't see the promised land. It was Joshua. And God told Moses, because of this and that, man, you're not going to see the promised land, but you're going to start the work. And I dare say that that's probably more important than receiving the promises, you starting the work. You guys are going to start promises, and you may not receive them or see it to full fruition, but you're going to start it, and that's just as important. So look, I'm done here, but I want to ask you guys this. Will you act in faith and believe God with your calling, right? Despite your failings, despite everything that you've gone through, and we just saw Samson's life, he completed his calling. Whatever God called him to do, he did it. It wasn't a failed act, right? It wasn't a last opportunity. He did complete his calling, and whatever God ordained him to do. Then by that same idea, you guys are going to complete your calling. But do you choose to believe God, right? The promises, you got to believe him. That's the hero of the faith right there. All right, so Pastor, thank you for being here. And, we don't have you here every week, so we'd be honored if you come up here, pray for us, for this congregation. Yeah, of course. And we'll end this service with prayer. Thank you, guys.
I can get up.
You guys want to get to your feet, please?